before we settle into tonight's journey. If you find meaning in these quiet reflections in the past, please consider subscribing and leaving a sign of your appreciation. It allows us to continue illuminating these hidden stories from the vast corners of our world. And I am truly curious where you are joining us from this evening. Please share your location in the space below. Now, let us begin our journey into the quiet expanse of the Texas desert. My name is Leo Maxwell, and for nearly 2 decades, I served as a guardian of the highways, a silent witness to the endless flow of travelers moving across the vast, open plains of Texas. This narrative takes us back to the summer of 1999, a different era, before the digital age fully took hold and long before the world shifted in ways I could never have anticipated. I was 42 years old that summer, stationed in the quiet town of Van Horn, where the interstate cuts through the Chihuahuan Desert like a gray ribbon laid across the ancient earth. It is a place of immense solitude, where the horizon seems to stretch into eternity and the intense warmth of the sun makes the asphalt shimmer and dance. Driving from El Paso to San Antonio, you pass through my territory, a landscape that is beautiful in its stark minimalism but demands respect. For 3 years, I had been living apart from my family. My daughter Sophie residing with her mother in Austin. The distance between us was more than miles. It was a silence that had grown with time. My former partner often said I found more comfort in the solitude of the road than in the complexities of a shared home, and perhaps there was a grain of truth in that. Out here, the rules were clear, a path to follow, a direction to go. Or so I believed. It began on a Tuesday in late July. I was working the early shift, driving east when the heat was at its peak. The air felt heavy, almost tangible. Approaching a specific marker on the highway, I saw it. At first, I assumed it was a trick of the light, a mirage common in such heat. But this was distinct. It was a large transport truck traveling ahead of me. I could see it clearly through the waving heat, yet my instruments remained silent. The radar screen showed a clear path. I blinked, cleared my eyes. The truck was there, plain as day, but it was different. It was a faded red color, an older model, and it possessed a peculiar quality. It was slightly translucent. I could see the texture of the highway passing beneath it, visible through the metal of the trailer, like looking through tinted glass. Dispatch. This is Unit 47. I radioed, my voice steady. I have an unusual situation near marker 142. A vehicle ahead appears transparent. Unit 47, we show clear monitors. Came the reply, advise you pull over. Likely heat distortion. They assumed it was a hallucination. Perhaps they were right. But as I watched, the phantom truck drifted slowly toward the edge of the road. It crossed a white line, departed the paved surface, and began to tilt. In slow motion, the entire vehicle tumbled down the gentle slope in complete silence. There was no crash, no sound of impact. It simply rolled, and then, like mist in a breeze, it faded into nothingness. I pulled over, my heart racing. I scanned the empty slope with binoculars. Nothing. No truck, no marks on the earth. Just the quiet desert. I checked my watch. 12:17 p.m. I noted it in my logbook. Convinced the sun had finally played a trick on my mind, I returned to the road, trying to rationalize the impossible, unaware that this was only the beginning. I continued my journey down the long, straight highway, the memory of the silent, fading truck playing over my mind. I told myself that the solitude of the desert had simply caught up with me. I was a man of logic, a man who believed in what he could touch and verify. Ghosts and transparent machines did not fit into the ledger of my life. I adjusted the air conditioning and breathed deeply, willing my pulse to return to its steady beat. 15 minutes had passed since the sighting. It was now 12:32 p.m. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows beneath the scrub brush. I came around a gentle curve near mile marker 145, and my breath caught in my throat. There at the bottom of the embankment was a sight that defied all reason. It was a semi-truck, a faded red color, lying on its side. But this time, it was not transparent. It was solid, real, and very much present. Fresh tracks were carved into the earth, and the hazard lights blinked in a steady, silent rhythm. It was the exact same truck I had seen 15 minutes earlier. I pulled over immediately, activating my lights. Dispatch Unit 47. A vehicle has left the road at mile marker 145, requesting assistance. I scrambled down the slope, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. The driver was inside the cab, dazed but conscious. He looked at me with confused eyes. "What happened?" he asked weakly. "You drifted off the road," I said gently. "Help is on the way. Just stay still." I stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. As the medical team assisted him, I walked the scene. The tracks showed he had drifted gradually, exactly as I had seen in the vision. I checked my notes. The phantom sighting was at 12:17 p.m. at mile marker 142. The actual event was at 12:32 p.m. at mile marker 145. 15 minutes later, 3 miles down the road, the mathematics of the situation began to form a chilling pattern. I wasn't just seeing things. I was seeing a preview. I had witnessed the accident exactly 15 minutes before it occurred in reality. The phantom truck had traveled through time, showing me a future that was yet to arrive. Why would I see this? And why me? As I filled out the report that evening, omitting the impossible details, the truth settled in my stomach like a heavy stone. Over the next few days, I watched the highway with new intensity. I began to see them again. Transparent cars, shimmering reflections that didn't belong. Always transparent, always moving silently, and always exactly 15 minutes ahead of their arrival in the physical world. I tested it obsessively. I would note a ghost vehicle, wait 15 minutes, and watch as the real vehicle appeared in that exact spot like clockwork. It was consistent, unbreakable. I was no longer just patrolling a highway. I was patrolling time itself. The weight of this realization pressed on me. If I could see these difficult moments before they happened, was it my duty to intervene? Could I have signaled that truck driver? Could I have smoothed his path? I stood on the edge of a great unknown, a shadow line between what was and what was yet to be. The desert stretched out before me, silent and indifferent, keeping its secrets close, while I sat in my patrol unit, watching the shimmer of the heat and waiting for the next ghost to arrive. I had to decide if I was brave enough to cross that line. For the weeks that followed, the highway became something more than just a stretch of asphalt and concrete. It transformed into a living, breathing puzzle, a corridor where the laws of physics seemed to bend and sway like the heat rising from the desert floor. I found myself consumed by a quiet obsession, a need to understand the rhythm of this impossible phenomenon. I was no longer merely a patrol officer. I had become a scholar of the inexplicable, a student of time itself. The desert is a place of routine, of predictable sunrises and sunsets. But now, that predictability had been fractured, revealing a deeper, more complex layer of reality beneath. I began to carry a small, leather-bound notebook with me, keeping it tucked in the breast pocket of my uniform. It was separate from my official logs, a private ledger of the impossible. In it, I recorded everything, every shimmer, every translucent shape, every silent echo of the future. The process was meticulous. I would park my unit on the shoulder, often under guise of monitoring speed, but my eyes were tuned to a different frequency. I was looking for the ghosts. The pattern revealed itself slowly, but with the undeniable precision of a Swiss watch. It was not random chaos. It was a structured anomaly. I would spot a vehicle, perhaps a family sedan laden with luggage for a summer trip, or a lone pickup truck kicking up dust, and it would possess that telltale transparency, that ethereal quality of being there and not being there simultaneously. I would glance at my watch, noting the second-hand's position, and record the time. Then, the waiting would begin. Those 15 minutes were the longest of my life. The desert silence would press in against the windows of my patrol car. I would watch the horizon, that flat, shimmering line where the sky met the earth, and count the minutes. And without fail, exactly 15 minutes later, the real vehicle would emerge from the distance. It was solid, opaque, kicking up real dust, driven by real people who had no idea that their journey had already been witnessed, their path already traced by my eyes a quarter of an hour prior. It was not just the vehicles I saw, it was the moments. I saw a tire blowout on a trailer, the rubber shredding silently in the ghost world, the vehicle swaying gently before regaining control. I noted the time, 2:14 p.m. I waited. At 2:29 p.m., the rail truck approached. I watched, breath held, as the tire gave way with a loud report, the driver wrestling the heavy machine to the shoulder exactly as the shadow had foretold. I did not intervene then. I was still testing, still verifying, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what I was witnessing. The consistency was terrifying. It was always exactly 15 minutes. Not 14, not 16. It was a perfect mathematical constant. I began to call it the shadow line. It felt appropriate, a boundary between the solid world we inhabit and the shadowy premonition of what was to come. I spent hours contemplating the nature of this window. Was it a warning, a glitch in the universe, or was the desert itself, with its ancient rocks and timeless winds, simply remembering the future before it happened? My life outside the patrol car began to feel distant, like a radio station drifting out of range. My conversations with colleagues were superficial. How could I explain that I was living 15 minutes ahead of them? I felt like a traveler in a foreign land who spoke a language no one else could understand. Even in my small apartment in Van Horn, I would find myself checking the time, wondering if the events of my evening, the brewing of coffee, the turning of a page in a book, were merely echoes of something that had already occurred in the shadow world. One afternoon, I watched a ghost car, a blue convertible with the top down, pull over to the side of the road. I watched the transparent driver step out, stretch his back, and look out over the vast scrubland. He stood there for a moment, a silhouette of light and dust, appreciating the view. Then he got back in and drove away. 15 minutes later, the real car appeared. It slowed, pulled over to the exact same patch of gravel. The real driver, a young man in a bright shirt, stepped out. He stretched his back in the exact same manner, looked at the same cactus, and smiled at the vastness of the world. It was a moment of profound peace, yet it shook me to my core. It confirmed that even the smallest, most insignificant human choices were seemingly locked in, pre-written in the book of time before the ink had even touched the page. This realization brought a sense of melancholy. If every stop, every swerve, every pause was predetermined, where was the freedom? We were all just actors following a script we hadn't read, moving through a play directed by the unseen forces of the universe. And I, Leo Maxwell, was the only one in the audience, watching the rehearsals just moments before the curtain rose. But with the melancholy came a growing sense of responsibility. If I could see the script, could I not suggest an edit? If I knew the lines before they were spoken, could I not change the ending of the scene? The notebook in my pocket grew heavy with observations, but the question of intervention burned in my mind. The desert offered no answers, only the endless, shimmering road and the relentless march of time. I knew that eventually I would have to stop just watching. Eventually, the shadow line would show me something that I could not simply record and let pass. I was a guardian of the highway. After all, my duty was to protect, to serve. And if my beat now extended into the future, then perhaps my duty did as well. The architecture of time was vast and imposing, but I began to wonder if it had a door, a way in for a man who simply wanted to keep the travelers safe on their long, lonely journey home. The opportunity to test the boundaries of my new reality arrived on a Friday afternoon, when the heat was beginning to soften into the golden hour of the day. The light was long and amber, casting deep shadows across the valley floor. I was parked near mile marker 167, a stretch of road known for its deceptive tranquility. The highway here is wide and inviting, luring drivers into a sense of ease that can quickly turn dangerous. I was sipping lukewarm coffee, my eyes scanning the middle distance, when the shimmer appeared. It was a motorcycle, moving with a speed that was evident even in its transparent form. The ghost rider was leaning low over the handlebars, weaving to the phantom traffic with reckless grace. I sat up straighter, my senses sharpening. This was not a leisurely traveler, stopping to admire the view. This was speed. This was danger. I watched, my heart rate climbing, as the ghost motorcycle began to wobble. It was a subtle shift at first, a loss of rhythm, and then the front wheel caught an imperfection in the road. Perhaps a patch of loose gravel or a groove in the asphalt. The bike twisted violently. The rider was thrown, his transparent form tumbling through the air, across the lanes, coming to rest in the center median. The bike skidded on its side, a silent specter of sparks and metal, until it stopped 100 yards down the road. The silence of the crash was more haunting than any noise could have been. I stared at the spot where the ghost rider lay motionless in the grass. I checked my watch immediately. It was 3:47 p.m. The accident, the real accident, was scheduled for 4:02 p.m. I had 15 minutes. For the first time since this phenomenon began, I did not reach for my notebook. I reached for the gear shift. A surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, flooded my system. This was not a passive observation. This was a countdown. I had witnessed a tragedy that had not yet happened, a life that was about to be altered, perhaps ended, on this lonely stretch of Texas highway. The question of fate and destiny vanished, replaced by the instinct of a first responder. I calculated the distance. The ghost rider had crashed right here, at mile marker 167. That meant the rail rider was currently miles back, speeding toward this inevitable moment. I made a decision. I would not wait for the crash. I would meet him before he reached his destiny. I pulled my unit onto the highway, lights flashing, but instead of waiting, I drove west, heading back toward the oncoming traffic, then turned around at the nearest crossover to position myself. I needed to intercept him. I parked my vehicle prominently on the shoulder, a mile before the crash site, and stepped out. I stood by the door, a visible sentinel in the uniform of the law, and I waited. The minutes ticked by, each second stretching out like hours. 3:55 p.m., 3:58 p.m. The road was empty, the heat waves distorting the distance. Doubt began to creep in. What if I was wrong? What if the future was immutable, and my presence here would only cause the accident I was trying to prevent? My palms were sweating, not from the heat, but from the weight of the moment. I was interfering with the timeline. I was stepping onto the stage and shouting lines that weren't in the script. Then, at 4 p.m., I heard the whine of the engine. It was a high-pitched, rising tone, the sound of a machine being pushed to its limits. A dot appeared on the horizon, growing rapidly into the shape of a motorcycle. It was the same bike, the same rider, wearing a dark jacket and a helmet that glinted in the sun. He was moving fast, far too fast. I stepped forward, raising my hand in a universal command to stop, while my other hand rested on the door of my unit, ready to pursue. The rider saw me. I saw the brake light flare, the front of the bike dip as he decelerated. The reckless speed bled away, replaced by the cautious approach of someone who knows they have been caught. He pulled over to the shoulder, stopping just yards in front of me. I walked toward him, my boots heavy on the gravel. He cut the engine and lifted his visor. He was young, barely into his 20s, with eyes wide with that mixture of fear and annoyance that comes from being pulled over. "Officer," he started, his voice defensive. I know, I was going a little fast. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was whole. He was breathing. There was no dirt on his jacket, no injury to his body. The image of his transparent form lying motionless in the median flashed in my mind, overlaying the reality of the vibrant young man before me. "You were going more than a little fast, son," I said, my voice softer than usual. I didn't feel the anger or the stern authority that usually accompanies a traffic stop. I felt an overwhelming wave of relief. You were flying. I'm sorry, he muttered, looking down at his tank. I'm just trying to make it to El Paso by sunset. You wouldn't have made it, I said, the words carrying a weight he couldn't possibly understand. Not at that speed. There's a patch of bad road about a mile up. Loose gravel, uneven surface. If you hit that doing 90, you don't walk away. He looked up at me, sensing something in my tone. It wasn't a lecture. It was a plea. He nodded slowly. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I replied. But now you do. I ran his license, went through the motions of the job, but my mind was elsewhere. I wrote him a ticket, a piece of paper that represented a financial penalty, but in reality was a receipt for a life extended. When I handed it to him, I held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Slowed down, I told him, the sunset will be there waiting for you. Make sure you are there to see it. He took the ticket, tucked it into his jacket, and nodded. Yes, sir. Thank you. I watched him merge back onto the highway. He rode cautiously now, keeping pace with the flow of traffic, a model of restraint. I watched until his taillight disappeared over the rise, past mile marker 167, past the place where his ghost had fallen. I checked my watch. 4:05 p.m. The time of the accident had passed. The road remained empty of debris. The median was undisturbed. The tragedy I had witnessed in the shadow line had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, uneventful afternoon. I sat back in my driver's seat and let out a breath I felt I had been holding for weeks. I had done it. I had reached into the machinery of time and adjusted a gear. I had changed the future. The feeling was intoxicating, a potent mix of humility and power. It wasn't just about watching anymore. I had been given a gift, a tool to safeguard the lives of these travelers in a way no other officer could. But as the sun dipped lower, painting the desert in shades of violet and indigo, a quiet thought whispered in the back of my mind. The energy of that crash, the violence of that moment I had foreseen, where did it go? Did it simply vanish, evaporated by my intervention? Or was the universe a balanced equation, and by erasing a variable on one side, had I unknowingly shifted the burden to another? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the empty, safe road ahead. For now, it was enough to know that a young man was riding toward the sunset, alive and whole, because I had been there to stand in the way of his fate. The weeks that followed the incident with the young motorcyclist marked a profound shift in my existence on the highway. I was no longer simply patrolling a stretch of asphalt. I had become, in my own mind, a silent custodian of destiny. The initial fear that had gripped me, the trembling uncertainty of meddling with time, had been replaced by a surging sense of purpose. It was a feeling akin to waking up after a long, dreamless sleep and finding that the world had suddenly snapped into focus. I had been given a lens through which I could see the cracks in the pavement of reality before they caused a traveler to stumble, and I believed, with a growing fervor, that it was my moral obligation to mend them. The desert summer deepened, the heat becoming a physical weight that pressed down on the valley floor, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of haze. Yet, within this oppressive atmosphere, I felt a strange clarity. The shadow line, as I had come to call it, appeared with increasing frequency, offering me glimpses of potential misfortunes. I saw tired drivers drifting across lanes in the ghostly silence of the future. I saw mechanical failures moments before metal fatigued and rubber gave way. I saw the intricate, chaotic dance of traffic resolving into moments of collision, and each time I acted, I developed a rhythm, a secret dance with time. I would see a sedan in the shadow world, its transparent form swerving to avoid a phantom obstacle, only to lose control. I would check my watch, calculate the 15-minute interval, and position myself. When the real vehicle arrived, I would be there, sometimes simply as a presence, my patrol lights flashing to enforce caution, slowing them down just enough to alter the equation. Other times, I would intervene directly, pulling a vehicle over for a minor infraction, a broken taillight, or a drifting lane change, simply to pause their journey. I would speak to the drivers, often families on long cross-country voyages or weary truckers chasing deadlines, and in our brief interactions, I would sense the invisible tragedy dissolving around them. They would drive away annoyed, perhaps, or grateful for warning, never knowing that in another version this afternoon, they never drove away at all. My intervention rate skyrocketed. In the span of 2 weeks, I had altered the course of 17 significant events. 17 times, the shadow line had shown me a moment of distress, and 17 times, I had stepped in to rewrite the script. The results were tangible in the silence of the radio. The usual calls for accident assistance and emergency response on my sector dropped to near zero. The highway, under my watch, had become unnaturally safe. Captain Reeves, a man of few words and even fewer compliments, took notice. I remember standing in his office one morning, the hum of the air conditioner battling the morning sun. He looked over the monthly reports, his brow furrowed, not in anger, but in confusion. "Maxwell," he said, tapping the paper with a thick finger, "your sector is the quietest in the district. Response times are non-existent because, frankly, there is nothing to respond to. You are spotting trouble before it even looks like trouble. What is your secret?" I hesitated, the truth resting heavy on my tongue. How could I explain that I wasn't spotting trouble, but remembering it from a future I had just witnessed? "Just paying attention, Captain," I said, offering a vague, modest smile. "Reading the road. The heat makes people predictable." "Well, whatever it is," he grunted, leaning back his chair, "keep doing it. It's good work. It's quiet work. And in our line of business, quiet is the best thing we can hope for." I left his office feeling a swell of pride that bordered on arrogance. I felt invincible. The desert, which had once seemed indifferent and cruel, now felt like a partner. I began to believe that the shadow line was not a glitch or a curse, but a gift designed specifically for me. I was the watchman on the wall, the shepherd ensuring the flock passed through the valley unharmed. I convinced myself that I was improving the world, one 15-minute interval at a time. I did not yet understand the complexity of the tapestry I was pulling at. I did not stop to consider that the threads of fate are woven tight, and that pulling one loose might cause the entire fabric to bunch and distort elsewhere. I was blinded by the light of my own success, unable to see the shadows lengthening behind the very lives I thought I was saving. My daughter, Sophie, called me during this period. Her voice, usually distant and guarded, sounded lighter. "Mom says you sound different," she said. "Less heavy." "I feel better," I told her, looking out the window of my small apartment at the vast, star-strewn sky. "I feel like I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to do." "That's good, Dad," she said. "I'm glad." I held on to that conversation like a talisman. It seemed to confirm that my actions were righteous, that this new power was healing not just the travelers on the road, but the fractured parts of my own life. I was saving strangers, and in turn, the universe was offering me a path back to my family. It was a beautiful, comforting lie. The highway stretched out before me, a golden road of opportunity, and I drove it with the confidence of a man who believed he held the steering wheel of destiny itself. I did not know then that the road has no master, only travelers, and that every journey demands a toll. The euphoria of my newfound purpose began to fray at the edges on a Wednesday evening, just as the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and deep orange. I was stationed near mile marker 178, a remote section of the interstate where the isolation feels absolute. The radio had been silent for hours, a testament to the peace I believed I had engineered. I was watching the heat waves distort the horizon when the shadow line manifested again, but this time the vision carried a weight, a density that felt different from the accidents and mechanical failures I had become accustomed to. In the shimmering air, I saw 2 vehicles materialize on the shoulder of the road, a sedan and a weathered pickup truck. They did not arrive with the chaotic energy of crash. They pulled over with deliberate, aggressive intent. I watched as the transparent figures emerged. From the sedan, a man and a woman stepped out, their body language broadcasting distress and fear. From the pickup, a larger figure emerged, moving with a speed and purpose that sent a chill through the warm cabin of my patrol unit. This was not a tragedy born of physics or chance. This was a tragedy born of human intent. I watched the scene unfold in silence. The large figure advanced on the couple. There was a confrontation. I could not hear the words, but the gestures were clear. The sharp, erratic movement of anger, the recoiling posture of fear. And then I saw the object in the large man's hand. It was not a tool for repair. It was an instrument of harm. The tension in the ghostly air snapped. The figure raised the object. The man from the sedan crumpled to the ground. The woman's silent scream seemed to echo in the vacuum of the vision. The aggressor returned to his truck and sped away, leaving the scene of devastation behind. The vision faded, leaving me staring at the empty, peaceful shoulder of the road. I checked my watch. 7:23 p.m. I had 15 minutes. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. This was different. This was not a tire blowing out or a driver falling asleep. This was a choice being made by a human being to inflict harm on another. Could I stop this? Should I? The advice of the old legends, to never interfere with the will of people, flashed through my mind, but was drowned out by the image of the falling man. I could not sit here and watch the clock tick down to a moment of irreversible loss. I threw the unit into gear and accelerated, my siren remaining silent. I needed to be there before the moment escalated, but I did not want to trigger a panic that could hasten the outcome. I drove with a singular focus, counting down the minutes. 12 minutes. 8 minutes. For minutes. At 7:35 p.m. I saw them. The real vehicles appeared on the horizon, exactly as foretold. The sedan, followed closely by the pickup, slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. The dust swirled around them as they came to a halt. I was already moving, closing the gap. I pulled my patrol unit up behind them. Just as the doors began to open, I stepped out, my presence announcing an immediate change in the dynamic. Everyone stay in your vehicles. I commanded, my voice projecting across the gap with authority I didn't know I possessed. The couple in the sedan froze, looking back at me with wide, terrified eyes. The driver of the pickup, the large man I had seen in the vision, was halfway out of his door. He hesitated. His hand was near his waist, near the place where I knew the threat was concealed. We locked eyes. In that moment, the timeline hung in the balance. He looked at me, then at the couple, and then back at me. He saw the uniform, the stance, the witness. The calculation in his eyes shifted. The rage was replaced by self-preservation. He slowly raised his empty hands. The object of harm remained hidden, unused. I approached with caution, following protocol, de-escalating the situation with practiced words. I separated the parties. I discovered that the threat was real, the intent had been there, but the action had been arrested. The man was taken into custody. Without a struggle, the couple, shaken but physically unharmed, held on to each other as if they had just woken from a nightmare. I had done it. I had stopped the profound darkness from taking root. As the backup units arrived to process the scene and take statements, I stood by the side of the road, looking at the spot where, in another version of reality, a man lay fallen. The ground was clean. The silence was of the desert night, not of grief. But as the adrenaline faded, a strange sensation crept over me. It was not the triumph I expected. It was a feeling of unease, a subtle vibration in the air, as if the world was vibrating slightly out of tune. I looked at the man I had saved. He was speaking to another officer, alive, breathing, his future restored. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the energy of that violence, the sheer kinetic force of the intent I had witnessed, had not simply vanished. Energy I remember from my school days cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. I had blocked the release of that dark energy here, at mile marker 178. But where had it gone? Had I dissipated it? Or had I merely displaced it? I looked out into the deepening dark of the desert, and for the first time since receiving this gift, I felt a true, chilling fear. I had changed a major chord in the symphony of time. The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with a response I could not yet hear. I drove back to the station that night in silence, the radio turned off, listening to the wind, and wondering if the universe was already working to correct the imbalance I had created. I had saved a life, yes, but at what cost, and who would be asked to pay it? The unease that had settled over me after the roadside confrontation did not dissipate with the morning sun. It lingered like a low-hanging fog, coloring my perceptions and casting a shadow over the sense of purpose I had so recently embraced. I found myself questioning every intervention. When I saw a car with a worn tire in the shadow line, I hesitated before pulling it over. When I saw a driver looking drowsy, I second-guessed my impulse to flash my lights. The universe, I was beginning to suspect, was a far more delicate and interconnected system than I had ever imagined. It was not a machine to be tinkered with, but a living ecosystem where every action had an equal and opposite reaction, even if that reaction was unseen, taking place miles away or days later. I was wrestling with these profound questions on a hot Monday afternoon, the kind of day where the air is so still you can almost hear the silence. I was parked near mile marker 195, a particularly desolate stretch where the road seems to dissolve into the horizon. I was not looking for trouble. I was simply watching the world go by, feeling the weight of my secret knowledge. And then the shimmering began. The shadow line appeared, not with the abruptness of a camera shutter, but with a slow, creeping grace, as if the air itself was turning to glass. But this time, the vision was not of a stranger's misfortune. This time, the vision was of my own. I saw a highway patrol unit parked on the shoulder, its familiar silhouette stark against the shimmering desert landscape. It was my unit, Unit 47. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest, as a ghostly figure emerged from the driver's side. It was me, the set of the shoulders, the way the hat was positioned, the deliberate stride. It was an out-of-body experience, a glimpse of myself from an impossible perspective. Ghost Leo approached the stopped vehicle, a dark sedan that had been pulled over. It looked like a routine traffic stop, a scene I had played out 1,000 times in my career. My ghostly self reached the driver's window. There was a brief, silent exchange, and then something happened with a speed that defied comprehension. An arm extended from the driver's side of the sedan. There was a flicker of movement, a sudden, sharp action. I watched my own transparent form recoil, stumbling backward. A second flicker. A third. My ghost self fell to the pavement. A silent, graceful collapse onto the sun-baked gravel of the shoulder. The sedan sped away, disappearing into the heat haze, leaving my ethereal body lying motionless on the ground. The vision held for a moment longer, a still life of a terrible, final piece, and then it dissolved. The shimmering ceased. The empty shoulder was just an empty shoulder again. The only thing that remained was the crushing reality of what I had just seen. I looked at my watch. The numbers seemed to blur. 2:17 p.m. I had 15 minutes until my own departure. The interior of my patrol unit, once a sanctuary of order and control, suddenly felt like a cage. The air was thick, suffocating. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. This was not like the other visions. Those had been about strangers, distant travelers on their own journeys. This was about the end of my own. This was my death, my destiny, laid out before me on the shimmering screen of the future. The questions that had been philosophical curiosities were now matters of immediate survival. Could I change it? If I simply drove away from this mile marker, if I avoided this traffic stop, would I survive? Or would the universe, with its new and terrifying logic, simply find another way to claim its due 15 minutes from now? Would a tire on my own vehicle blow? Would I drift off to sleep and meet the same fate as the trucker I had saved? I sat frozen, caught in a paradox of indecision. A part of me, the primal, human part, screamed to run, to drive, to get as far away from mile marker 195 as possible, to hide from the oncoming wave of fate. But another part, the part that had been a police officer for 17 years, the part that believed in facing reality head-on, knew it wasn't that simple. If the shadow line was showing me what was meant to happen, then somewhere out there on Interstate 10, a driver in a dark sedan was heading this way. In 15 minutes, our paths were set to cross. The script had been written. The final scene was set. The only question was, could I tear the page out of the book? I had to try. For Sophie, the thought of my daughter, of leaving her to navigate the world alone after her mother had already departed, was a pain sharper than any vision. I started the car. I would change the variables. I would change the where. I began to drive west, away from mile marker 195, my eyes scanning the eastbound lane for a dark sedan. If I was not at that location, the stop could not happen. The final scene could not play out. As I drove, I saw him, a sedan traveling east, coming toward me, and in the shimmering heat between us, I could see his ghost, a man in his 30s with a hollow look in his eyes, and on the seat beside him, the shape of the instrument he intended to use. He was the one, and he was on this highway. Right now, our paths were meant to cross at mile marker 195, but I was changing the meeting point. I was driving in the opposite direction. The sedan passed me, a blur of dark metal and tinted glass. I watched in my rear-view mirror, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had done it. I had seen him, and I had avoided him. I pulled over to the side of the road, miles from the designated spot, and checked my watch. 2:28 p.m. For minutes had passed since the moment of my prophesied end. I was alive. I was breathing. I had beaten it. I had stared into the face of my own end, and I had turned away. A wave of relief, so profound was dizzying, washed over me. Destiny, it seemed, could be outsmarted. The shadow line had been wrong. That is when my radio crackled to life, the static cutting through the silence like a knife. All units, we have an officer down. Mile marker 195, eastbound. Repeat, officer down. A difficult situation has unfolded. My blood ran cold. The relief evaporated, replaced by a dread so absolute it felt like ice in my veins. Dispatch, I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. This is Unit 47. Can you identify the officer? There was a pause that stretched into an eternity. Unit 47. It's Officer Clara Jenkins. Unit 52. She was responding to a suspicious vehicle at mile marker 195. Clara, my partner, my friend, she had been on patrol behind me, covering the next sector. When I had driven away, she had become the closest unit. She had taken the call I was supposed to take. She had made the stop I was supposed to make. I had not changed my death. I had only changed who it happened to. The universe had course-corrected, and Clara had paid the price. The dispatcher's voice continued to relay information, but the words were a distant, meaningless buzz. All I could hear was a name. Clara, the world outside my windshield, the vast desert landscape that felt so alive and full of secrets just moments before, now seemed flat and lifeless. The colors bled out of it, leaving a monochrome panorama of my own failure. I had seen my own end, and in my fear, in my selfish need to survive for my daughter, I had run. And in running, I had led fate directly to Clara's door. The universe, in its cold, impartial calculus, had demanded a conclusion at mile marker 195. I had abdicated my role, and Clara, unknowingly, had stepped in to take my place. I spun my unit around, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust that mirrored the chaos in my mind. I floored the accelerator, racing back toward mile marker 195, back toward the scene I had so desperately avoided. But I already knew what I would find. The shadow line had shown me the truth 15 minutes earlier. It had shown me a uniformed officer falling. It had shown me a life extinguished on the side of the road. And the horrifying truth that was beginning to dawn on me was that the vision had not been wrong. It had simply been incomplete. It had shown me the outcome, but it had not specified the individual. The universe did not care about names. It only cared about balance. The drive was a blur of adrenaline and self-recrimination. Every mile I covered was a testament to my cowardice. I saw the flashing lights in the distance long before I arrived. They pulsed in the twilight, a beacon of tragedy that I had set in motion. When I arrived, the scene was one controlled chaos. Another patrol car was parked at a sharp angle. An ambulance was already there, its back doors open. I saw Clara on a stretcher, a white sheet pulled up over her. The image was so stark, so devastatingly final, it stole the air from my lungs. I had not just postponed a tragedy. I had handed it to someone else. I had chosen who would pay the price. Captain Reeves found me standing by my car, staring blankly at the scene. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Martinez," he said, his voice low and strained. "This wasn't your fault. I was supposed to be here." I managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "You were west of this position," he countered, trying to apply logic to a situation that had transcended it. Clara was closer. She took the call. That's how it works. But it wasn't how it worked. Not anymore. Not for me. I was supposed to have my final moment at 2:32 p.m. at mile marker 195. The shadow line had shown me, but I had altered my position. I had changed the variables, and Clara had unknowingly stepped into the equation. The universe had demanded a sacrifice to balance the books, and it had taken one. It just hadn't been me. Later that evening, I sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the El Paso hospital. The smell of antiseptic and quiet grief filled the air. Reeves had updated me. Clara had been taken here, but there had been nothing the doctors could do. The event on the highway had been too swift, too severe. I sat there for hours, staring at my hands, the same hands that had steered my vehicle away from my own fate. I thought about the 17 lives I had saved. Had this been the cost? Had 17 other families, in 17 other towns, experienced a sudden, inexplicable loss to pay for my interventions? The math was horrifying, a cosmic ledger written in grief that I had been unknowingly filling out. Reeves sat down beside me sometime after midnight. "The man is in custody," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. He had a warrant out of New Mexico. Clara ran his plates, and when she approached the vehicle, he panicked. He paused, looking at me. "She did everything right, Jake. This is on him, not on you. But he was wrong. It was on me. It was on me because I had seen it coming. I had seen the shadow of this moment. And instead of facing it, instead of trying to find another way to alter the outcome, I had saved only myself." I couldn't tell him that. I couldn't tell anyone. The secret of the shadow line was a solitary burden, a weight that was now crushing me. 2 days later, I attended Clara's memorial service. I stood in the back, a ghost of my own partner's farewell. I listened to the eulogies, to the stories of her kindness, her bravery, her dedication. And with every word, the guilt twisted deeper inside me. She was being celebrated for the very qualities that had led her to take my place. She had been brave, while I had been a coward. She had done her duty, while I had shirked mine. After the service, her husband, a quiet man I had only met a few times, approached me. He took my hand, his grip firm. "Clara always said you were the best partner she ever had," he said, his eyes filled with profound, unbreachable sadness. "She said you always had her back." The irony of his words was so cruel, so devastating. It almost brought me to my knees. I had her back, all the way up until the moment it mattered most. And then I had let her step in front of me to face the future that was meant for me. I drove back to my empty apartment in Van Horn that night, the desert swallowing the beams of my headlights. The world had not just lost its color. It had lost its meaning. The shadow line was not a gift. It was a curse. It was a terrible, intimate knowledge of the price of every choice. And I understood now, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow, that you cannot cheat fate. You can only choose who suffers in your place. And that choice, I realized, was a burden no human soul was ever meant to bear. The days following Clara's memorial service bled into one another, each one a mirror of the last, gray and indistinct. I took the bereavement leave Captain Reeves offered, but there was no comfort to be found. Grief is a house with many rooms, and I found myself trapped in the one marked guilt, a chamber with no windows and no doors. The desert, which had once been a canvas for my purpose, now felt like a vast, empty courtroom where I was both the accused and the sole witness to my crime. Every sunrise over the distant mountains was a fresh indictment. Every sunset was a reminder of a day I had survived that Clara had not. When I finally returned to work, I was a changed man. The fire of purpose that had burned so brightly within me had been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ashes of understanding. I requested desk duty, a quiet corner filing reports, anything to keep me away from the open road and its terrible, shimmering truths. Captain Reeves denied the request. "Martinez," he had said, his voice laced with gentle but firm sympathy, "the highway is your home. You can't run from it. We need you out there." He thought he was helping me face my grief. He could not know he was sentencing me to my own unique brand of torment. So I went back out. I drove the same long, lonely stretches of Interstate 10, but the world looked different now. My patrol car was no longer a chariot of intervention. It was a hearse, and I was merely its driver, tasked with observing the inevitable processions of fate. The shadow line, indifferent to my anguish, continued to appear. It shimmered into existence in the midday heat, in the soft light of dawn, and in the deep velvet of the desert night. And it continued to show me the future. The first time it happened after my return, I felt a physical sickness. I saw a minivan, the kind filled with the cheerful chaos of family on vacation, its ghostly form suddenly swerving as a tire gave way. The vision was silent, clinical. The van corrected, but not before striking a guardrail with a soft, ethereal impact. I noted the time, 10:42 a.m. I noted the location, mile marker 189. Then I waited. The 15 minutes that followed were an agony of inaction. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The police officer in me, the man trained for 17 years to protect and serve, screamed to act, to race ahead, to warn them, to pull them over for a seatbelt check, anything to break the chain of events. But the image of Clara's face, peaceful and still, held me in my seat. I had learned the terrible cost of playing God. I would not do it again. I would not trade this family's well-being for a stranger's sorrow somewhere else down the line. At 10:57 a.m., the real minivan appeared. I watched it approach, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. And then it happened, the sharp report of the tire blowing out, the sickening lurch of the vehicle, the screech of rubber against asphalt. The driver fought for control, and just as the vision had shown, the van scraped along the guardrail before shuddering to a halt. It was all there, the crying children, the shaken parents climbing out to assess the damage. They were alive, frightened but alive. Only after the event had concluded, after reality had caught up with the preview, did I key my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We have a single vehicle incident at mile marker 189. A minivan has sustained tire failure. No apparent injuries, but the vehicle is disabled." I drove to the scene, offered assistance, and called for a tow truck, my movements mechanical, my voice a monotone. The family thanked me for my quick response. They had no idea I had been waiting for them, a silent spectator at their pre-written misfortune. This became my new routine. I became a historian of the immediate future. I saw a trucker, drowsy from the long miles, begin to drift into the oncoming lane. I watched the ghostly head-on collision play out in silence. 15 minutes later, When the Real event occurred, I was the first to call it in. I saw an elderly couple's brakes fail on a long, downhill slope. I did nothing. I saw a teenager, distracted by something inside their car, miss a curve. I did nothing. Each time, I was a passive observer, my heart hardening into a knot of self-loathing. I was letting these tragedies happen. My inaction felt like a betrayal of my oath, of my very humanity. But my action, I knew with a terrible certainty, was a betrayal of a different kind, a shuffling of fate's cruel deck, dealing the losing hand to someone else. The other officers noticed a change in me. They attributed my quiet, withdrawn nature to the loss of my partner. They saw my grim efficiency at action scenes as the mark of a seasoned, stoic professional, not the cold detachment of a man condemned to watch replays of tragedies he could have prevented. I let them believe it. It was easier than the truth. The highway was no longer my home. It was my purgatory. And every day, I drove through it, haunted not by the ghosts of the past, but by the ghosts of a future I was forced to watch and powerless to change. The weight of this knowledge was a solitary burden, and I carried alone, a silent watchman, on the loneliest road in the world. The burden of my secret knowledge grew heavier with each passing week. The highway became a landscape of ghosts, a constant reminder of the tragedies I was forced to witness. I began to seek refuge in the quiet corners of the world, away from the endless ribbon of asphalt. I took my meals at small, out-of-the-way diners and spent my off hours in the solitude of my apartment, trying to outrun the echoes of the future that clung to me like desert dust. It was during one of these attempts at escape, at a truck stop near Van Horn, that the world shifted once again. I was standing by my patrol unit, filling the tank under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the station's awning. The air was cool, the night sky a blanket of brilliant, distant stars. I was lost in thought, contemplating the quiet hum of the fuel pump, when a voice cut through the stillness. "You're the one who sees them." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a low, raspy voice that seemed to carry the dry weight of the desert itself. I turned, my hand instinctively moving toward the reassuring shape of my service weapon, a reflex born of years on the job. An old man stood there, silhouetted against the bright lights of the convenience store. He was frail, his skin weathered and creased like old leather, but his eyes, even in the dim light, were sharp and unerringly alert. "Excuse me," I said, my voice tight with caution. "The shadow vehicles," he continued, taking a slow step forward. "The ghost highway. You can see 15 minutes ahead." He tapped his temple with a gnarled, trembling finger. "I can see it in your eyes. It's the same look I had, the look of a man watching a movie that no one else can see." I stared at him, my defenses crumbling. The words he spoke were the secret language of my curse. For the first time since this all began, I was not alone in my impossible reality. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Name's Arthur Vance," he said. "I was a state trooper myself, back in the 50s and 60s. Worked the same stretch of road, back when it was just Highway 80. And I saw the same thing you're seeing now." My heart pounded against my ribs. "Every day. Every day for 30 years, he confirmed, pulling a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket. He lit one with hands that shook, not from weakness, but from the memory of a long-held burden. Started for me in the summer of 52, right after the big tests out in the desert. The tests, I asked, though a part of me already knew what he meant. Arthur gestured vaguely to the west, toward the unseen plains of Nevada. Back then, they were doing things in the desert. Try to understand the building blocks of the universe by breaking them apart. Big flashes of light, shock waves that would rattle windows 100 miles away. The whole desert was buzzing with a strange energy. He took a long drag from a cigarette, the tip glowing like a hot coal in the darkness. Something about splitting the world apart in the middle of nowhere. It did something to the fabric of things around here. Created a fold, a wrinkle in time. The locals had names for it. the shimmer, the echo road. I called it the shadow line. You could see 15 minutes into the future? I asked, needing to hear him say it again. Exactly like you, he affirmed, his eyes locking onto mine, down to the minute. And I'm guessing, by the look on your face, you've already learned the hard lesson. What lesson? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That you can't change it, he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer, more intimate. Not really. You can move it around. You can delay it. You can even, if you're not careful, transfer it to someone else. But you can't stop what the shadow line shows you. The universe, it finds a way to balance its books. The image of Clara's face flashed in my mind. So vividly it was as if she were standing right there with us. I felt the color drain from my face. Arthur saw it. He nodded slowly, a deep, sorrowful understanding in his eyes. Ah, he said softly, so you've already paid that price. You tried to save someone or yourself, and someone else settled the account. He didn't need me to answer. He could read the story in my silence. How did you deal with it? I asked, my voice raw. I didn't, he said, the words stark and honest. I just watched. For 30 years, I watched. I saw hundreds of difficult moments, dozens of final departures, and I didn't lift a finger to stop them, because every time I tried in the early days, the universe just shifted the weight. I'd save one life and lose another down the road. After a while, I realized the only way to not make things worse was to do nothing at all. That's not acceptable, I protested, the officer me rising up. No, he agreed, his voice filled with profound weariness. It's not, but it's the reality of our situation. He took another long drag from a cigarette. The shadow line isn't a gift, son. It's a curse. It shows you just enough to make you think you can be a hero. But it doesn't show you the consequences. It doesn't show you the other side of the ledger. You'll drive yourself mad trying to outsmart it. He finished his cigarette, dropping it to the pavement and crushing it under his boot. He looked at me one last time, his gaze heavy with shared, unspoken grief. I'm telling you this because I saw that look in your eyes and I knew. Someone had to tell you that you're not crazy. But someone also had to tell you to stop trying. The price is too high. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the truck stop, leaving me alone with the hum of the fuel pump and the terrible, clarifying weight of his words. I was not alone, but the confirmation of my curse was no comfort. It was a life sentence. Arthur Vance had just handed me the rule book for my own personal hell, and the first and only rule was to do nothing. Arthur Vance's revelations had given a name and a history to my haunting, but they had not provided solace. Instead, they had planted a seed of doubt that grew into a dark, sprawling vine, choking the last remnants of my peace. He had spoken of a conservation of tragedy, a universal law where every debt must be paid, every loss balanced. I wanted to reject his fatalism. I wanted to believe that the 17 lives I had intervened to save were true victories, moments where human agency had triumphed over blind destiny. But the memory of Clara and the undeniable logic of the shadow line gnawed at me. I needed to know. I needed empirical proof. If Arthur was right, then my acts of heroism were merely acts of postponement or displacement. So, in the quiet hours between shifts and on my restless days off, I began an investigation not into crimes, but into the afterlives of the people I had saved. I still had my notebook, the leather-bound ledger where I had meticulously recorded every intervention. 17 names, 17 dates, 17 altered destinies. I treated it like a cold case, tracking down these individuals with the skills I had honed over a lifetime in law enforcement. I wasn't looking for gratitude. I was looking for patterns. The first name on my list was a young motorcyclist, the boy I had pulled over before he could meet his fate at mile marker 167. I found him easily enough. He was alive, still residing in El Paso. But as I dug deeper into public records, a chilling detail emerged. 3 days after our encounter, 3 days after I had sent him riding off into the sunset with a warning and a ticket, his younger brother had been involved in a motorcycle accident on the same highway, just 10 miles west. The boy had not survived. The grief that I had deflected from one family had simply circled back and struck them from a different angle. My hands trembled as I turned the page. Next was a woman whose sedan I had delayed, preventing a collision with a drifting truck. She was safe, but her husband, a man with no history of health issues, had collapsed at his workplace a week later. A sudden, unexplained cardiac event. He was 42, the same age as me. The tragedy that had missed her on the road had found him in the safety of his office. One after another, the pattern held with a terrifying consistency. The truck driver I had warned about black ice made it home, only to lose his best friend the following morning. The family whose vacation I had saved from a blowout returned home to find their house consumed by an electrical fire. It was as if death was a persistent creditor, one who could be delayed but never denied. If the intended target was removed from the equation, the debt was transferred to the nearest available connection, a sibling, a spouse, a friend. Arthur had been right. The universe kept its books clean. The ledger of ghosts was balanced perfectly. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by these files, the silence of the room amplifying the roar of my own guilt. I had been playing a game I didn't understand, moving pieces on a board without knowing the rules. I had thought I was saving lives, but I was merely reshuffling sorrow. I had traded a sudden roadside tragedy for a brother's grief, a widow's tears, a friend's loss. The weight of it was suffocating. I had been proud of my interventions. I had walked with a lighter step, believing I was a guardian. Now, I saw myself as a carrier of a contagion, a man who, in his arrogance, had spread misfortune to those who were never meant to bear it. I closed the notebook. I couldn't look at the other names. I didn't need to. The truth was evident in the first few pages. The shadow line was absolute. It showed what must happen. To interfere was not an act of mercy. It was an act of vanity. I resolved then and there to stop. No more interventions. No more saving. I would become what Arthur Vance had become, a watcher, a silent witness to the inevitable. It was a bleak and lonely path, but it was the only one that didn't leave a trail of unintended victims in its wake. Or so I thought. The universe, it seemed, was not quite done testing my resolve. The resolve to remain passive is easy to hold in the abstract, in the quiet of an apartment or the safety of a retrospection. It is much harder to maintain when the chaos of the world unfolds before your eyes. I returned to my patrol, cloaked in my new philosophy of non-interference. I watched the shimmer of the road, acknowledged the ghosts of the future, and let them play out their destined roles. I became a ghost myself, haunting the highway in a tangible form, present but disengaged. Then came the afternoon that challenged everything. I was stationed 5 miles west of mile marker 210, a stretch of road that winds through rocky outcrops, offering blind curves and hidden dangers. The radio crackled with a high-priority alert. All units, situation developing eastbound at mile marker 210. Reports of a multi-vehicle incident involving potential criminal activity. Suspect are armed. Proceed with caution. As the dispatch relayed the details, the air around my car began to shimmer. The shadow line opened, showing me the scene 5 miles ahead. I saw a cluster of ghostly vehicles stopped on the shoulder, a sedan boxed in by 2 trucks. I saw transparent figures moving with aggressive purpose. It was not an accident. It was a robbery in progress. In the silent theater of the vision, I watched the escalation. I saw the flashes of light that indicated gunfire. I saw a figure fall. Then another. It was a massacre. A family, a man, a woman, and a child, was being terrorized. The ghost highway showed the father falling first, then the mother. The child remained, a small, terrified shape in the back seat. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. The event was scheduled for 4:02 p.m. I had 15 minutes. My philosophy of non-interference crumbled instantly. This was not a random tire blowout or a sleepy driver. This was violence. This was malice. And there was a child involved. The image of the small figure cowering in the car pierced through my resolve. I thought of Sophie. I thought of the helplessness of being small in a world of large, dangerous things. Could I really sit here and let a child lose their parents because I was afraid of the cosmic bookkeeping? The dilemma tore at me. If I intervened, Arthur's law suggested I would be trading these lives for others. Who would pay the price? Another family down the road? Someone close to the victims? Someone close to me? The thought of Sophie, safe in Austin, flashed in my mind. Was I risking her safety by saving this family? But the alternative was unbearable. To sit and watch a murder happen when I had the power to stop it felt like a complicity I could not live with. The conservation of tragedy was a cruel theory, but the reality of a child alone in the world was a concrete horror. I made my choice. I would not let them die. If there was a price to be paid, I would face it later. Right now, my duty was clear. I engaged my lights and siren, the wail cutting through the desert silence. I drove with a precision born of desperation, calculating the minutes. I needed to arrive before the shooting started. I needed to change the timeline not just by seconds, but by minutes. I needed to be there before the guns were drawn. I arrived at mile marker 210 with 2 minutes to spare. The scene was exactly as the shadow line had shown. The sedan, the trucks, the aggressive posturing. But the violence had not yet erupted. My arrival changed the atmosphere instantly. The sudden presence of law enforcement, the blare of the siren, the flashing lights, it shattered the confidence of the assailants. I positioned my vehicle as a shield, stepping out with my weapon drawn, my voice commanding and steady. State police, step away from the vehicle. The standoff was tense, hanging on a knife's edge. The gunmen looked at me, then at their intended victims. They weighed their options. In the ghost timeline, this was the moment they opened fire. In this timeline, faced with an armed officer and the certainty of backup arriving, their resolve faltered. One suspect lowered his weapon, then the other. The moment of violence passed, evaporating into the heat. I moved in, securing the scene, handcuffing men while keeping a reassuring eye on the family in the sedan. The father was shaken, the mother weeping, but they were alive. The child in the back seat looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, and in that gaze, I found a moment of pure, uncomplicated validation. I had done it. I had saved them. As backup arrived and took control of the scene, I stepped back, leaning against my patrol car, my heart rate slowly returning to normal. I looked at the family, huddled together, safe. I looked at the desert, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the balance to correct itself. It didn't take long. My personal phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't dispatch. It was a personal call. I pulled it out, seeing Sophie's name on the screen. A cold dread, sharper than any knife, pierced my chest. I answered, my voice trembling. "Dad." Her voice was small, broken. "Dad, there's been an accident." My world stopped. "Sophie, are you okay?" "It's Mom," she sobbed. We were driving home. A truck, it ran a red light. It hit us on her side. "Dad, she's not moving." I dropped the phone. The sounds of the highway, the voices of the other officers, the cry of the family I had just saved, it all faded into a buzzing silence. I looked at the trucks involved in the robbery. One of the suspects had a partner, a driver who had fled the scene when I arrived, a detail I had missed in the chaos. He had fled east, towards Austin. The universe had balanced its books. I had saved a family of strangers on a desert highway. And in exchange, miles away, in a city I couldn't reach, the mother of my child had paid the price. The ledger was closed, and I was left with the debt. The journey to Austin was a blur of asphalt and regret, a pilgrimage of sorrow undertaken in a haze of disbelief. I drove not as an officer of the law, But as a man whose world had been irrevocably fractured, the highway, which had been my domain, now felt like a corridor of judgment. Every mile marker was a reminder of the distance I had failed to bridge, every passing car a testament to lives I had meddled with. I arrived at the hospital as the sun was setting, casting long, mournful shadows across the city. The light was beautiful in a cruel way, indifferent to the darkness that had descended upon my family. Isabella was gone. The doctor spoke to me in hushed, practiced tones, words like trauma and immediate, floating in the air like dust motes, failing to land or take root in my mind. The only reality was the silence where her voice used to be. Sophie sat in the waiting room, a small figure in a plastic chair that seemed designed for discomfort. When she saw me, the dam broke. We held each other, two survivors of shipwreck clinging to the same piece of debris. In her tears, I felt the weight of my own choices pressing down on me, a physical burden that threatened to crush my ribs. I stayed in Austin for funeral, a somber affair under gray skies that seemed to weep along with us. I stood by the grave, listening to the eulogies, the memories of a woman who had been vibrant and full of life. Isabella had been the anchor of our family, even in our separation. She had been the steady ground while I chased the horizon. Now, the ground was gone and Sophie and I were adrift. In the quiet moments after service, I walked through the house that had once been my home. I saw the pictures on the mantelpiece, us on a vacation, Sophie's graduation, moments frozen in time. I realized then that my ability to see the future had robbed me of the present. I had been so focused on the shadow line, on the 15 minutes ahead, that I had missed the years slipping away right in front of me. I had traded the precious, mundane reality of my family for the ghostly, shifting sands of fate. Sophie asked me, late one night as we sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, "Do you think it was random, Dad? Just bad luck?" I looked at her, her eyes red-rimmed and seeking answers. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to confess my sin, to tell her that I had bartered her mother's life for a stranger's. I wanted to scream that the universe was a cold accountant that demanded payment for every act of interference. But I couldn't. The truth would destroy her. It would turn her grief into hatred, her loss into a burden of blame she should never have to carry. "It was an accident, Sophie," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. "Just a terrible, tragic accident. Sometimes things just happen." It was the hardest lie I'd ever told. It tasted of ash and betrayal, but it was a necessary mercy. I would carry the knowledge alone. I would be the container for the poison so that she could remain safe from it. After a week, I had to return to Van Horn. Sophie went to stay with her aunt, needing distance from the empty house. I drove back west toward the desert, toward the source of my curse. The landscape changed as I drove, the green hills of the hill country, giving way to the stark, brown plains. The heat returned, wrapping around the car like a familiar, suffocating blanket. I tried to resign. I walked into Captain Reeves' office and placed my badge on his desk. "I can't do it anymore," I said. "I'm done." Reeves looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and frustration. "You're grieving, Martinez. That's natural. But you're a good officer, the best I have. The highway needs you. Take some more time, but don't throw it all away." "You don't understand," I pleaded. "It's not safe. I'm not safe." "You saved a family last week," he reminded me. "You stopped a violent crime. You're a hero, Jake. Don't let your loss blind you to the good you do." He didn't know. He couldn't know. He saw a hero where I saw a harbinger of doom. He saw a saved family where I saw a cosmic transaction that had cost me my wife. But I lacked the strength to argue. I lacked the words to explain the unexplainable. So I took my badge back. I returned to patrol. I returned to the road, a prisoner of my own duty, condemned to watch the future unfold one 15-minute tragedy at a time. Returning to work was not a return to normalcy. It was a descent into a deeper circle of isolation. I requested the night shift, hoping that the darkness would hide the shadow line, that the lack of heat shimmer would blind me to the ghosts. But the phenomenon was not dependent on the sun. It was a tear in the fabric of my perception, and it was widening. The visions followed me off the highway. They began to invade the sanctuary of my small apartment in Van Horn. I would be sitting in my armchair, trying to read a book, and the wall would dissolve into a shimmering transparency. I would see my own living room 15 minutes in the future. I would see myself pacing or washing a dish, or simply staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It was a maddening echo, a constant reminder that I was trapped in a loop of time. I stopped sleeping. The nights became a landscape of waking dreams and tangible nightmares. I would lie in bed and see the ceiling fan spinning above me, and then superimposed over it, I would see the fan as it would be 15 minutes later, stopped or spinning at a different speed. The mundane details of existence became instruments of torture. I was living life twice, once in preview and once in reality. The gap between the two, that 15-minute buffer, became the only place where I felt truly alive, suspended in the waiting. One evening, I was at the station, catching up on paperwork I had neglected. The office was quiet, the only sound the scratching of my pen and the low murmur of the dispatch radio. I looked up at the clock on the wall. 11:42 p.m. Then the shimmer took over the room. I saw the station as it would be at 11:57 p.m., but it wasn't empty. I saw Arthur Vance standing in the doorway. He looked older, if that was possible, more translucent than the ghosts on the highway. He was looking directly at my desk, directly at where I was sitting. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, his expression one of urgent warning. Then he faded. I sat frozen. Arthur Vance, the man who had explained the curse to me, the man who had disappeared into the night weeks ago. Was he here? Was he coming? Or was this a vision of something else? I waited. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 11:50, 11:55. At exactly 11:57 p.m., the door to the station opened. But it wasn't Arthur Vance. It was a young officer, a rookie named Davis. He walked in, looking flustered. "Officer Martinez?" he asked. "There's an old man outside. Says he needs to talk to you. Won't speak to anyone else. Says his name is Vance." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Bring him in," I said. "Bring him in now." Arthur shuffled into the room, looking exactly as he had in the vision, though solid now. He wore a heavy coat despite the warm night, shivering as if the cold came from within. He sat down opposite me, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for invisible threats. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "It's following me," I admitted. "It's not just the road anymore. It's everywhere. My house. Here. I can't escape it." Arthur nodded slowly. "The shadow line, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And you use it to change a big event. That robbery, the death of your wife. Those are heavy stones to throw into the pond. The ripples are spreading. How do I stop it?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. "How do I turn it off?" "You can't," Arthur said. "Not in the way you want. The door's open now. But—" He hesitated, looking around the room again. "There is a way to close it from the other side." "What do you mean?" "The shadow line is a breach," he explained. "A wound in the world. It needs to be stitched shut, but the thread has to come from within the wound." I stared at him, trying to parse his riddle. "Speak plainly, Arthur. I'm tired." "You have to go into it," he said softly. "You have to step into the 15 minutes, not as a viewer, but as a participant. You have to inhabit the shadow time." "Become a ghost?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "Become a guardian," he corrected. "A permanent one. If you enter the shadow line fully, if you embrace the time shift, you leave this reality. You become part of the echo. You cease to be a man in the present and become a fixture of the future. The wound closes behind you. The vision stops for everyone else. The balance is restored. And what happens to me? Arthur looked at me with profound sadness. You exist in the preview. You live in the 15 minutes before everything happens. You see the world before it arrives. You're always ahead, always watching, never touching. You become the silence before the storm. It was a sentence of eternal exile, to be removed from the flow of time, to be separated forever from Sophie, from the memory of Isabella, from the touch of the solid world. Why would I do that? I whispered, because if you don't, Arthur said, leaning forward, the breach will widen. The 15 minutes will become 30, then an hour, then a day. Reality will start to unravel around you, and everyone you know, everyone you love, they'll be caught in the fraying edges. Sophie, she's not safe as long as the door is open. The mention of my daughter was the key. He knew. Somehow, he knew that she was the only thing keeping me tethered to this world. And he was telling me that my presence, my very existence as a conduit for this power, was a threat to her. I need time, I said, rubbing my temples. I need to think. Time is the one thing we don't have, son, Arthur said. Standing up, the clock is ticking, and it's running fast. He turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the silent station. I looked at the clock. It was midnight. A new day had begun. But for me, I realized with a sinking heart, the sun might never truly rise again. I was standing on the precipice of decision that would end my life as I knew it, not with a bang, but with a silent step into the shadows. The warning Arthur Vance had delivered hung in the air of the station long after he had departed, a heavy, suffocating truth that I could not exhale. He had spoken of the shadow line as a wound, and in the days that followed, I watched that wound fester. The phenomenon, once contained to the lonely stretches of the highway, began to bleed into the fabric of my everyday existence with terrifying speed. It was no longer just a 15-minute preview. The boundaries of time were dissolving around me like sugar in hot water. I would wake up in my apartment and reach for a glass of water, only to see my hand pass through it. A ghostly overlap of the moment, I would reach for it minutes later. I would walk down the street to the diner and see the pedestrians as dual images, the solid people of the present and their translucent echoes walking 15 minutes ahead. The world became a cacophony of visual noise, a chaotic layering of the now and the soon-to-be. Driving became impossible. I could not distinguish the real cars from the ghosts. I would brake for a phantom truck that wouldn't exist for another quarter hour, or I would nearly collide with a real vehicle, because its future echo had distracted me. I was forced to take leave again, confining myself to my apartment, drawing the blinds to shut out the dual world outside. But the walls offered no protection. I saw the mailman deliver letters before he arrived on the street. I saw the phone ring before it made a sound. I was living in a constant state of déjà vu, a prisoner of a timeline that refused to stay linear. Then came the moment Arthur had predicted. I was on the phone with Sophie, her voice the only anchor I had left to sanity. She was telling me about her day at school, about a project she was working on. Suddenly, her voice wavered. "Dad," she said. "The phone, it sounds weird. Like an echo. I can hear you saying things before you say them." My blood ran cold. The breach was widening. It wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was leaking through connection to her. The temporal distortion was traveling down the wire, reaching out to one person I had sworn to protect. "Sophie," I said, my voice trembling. Hang up the phone now." "But Dad, I'm scared." The lights in the living room, they're flickering, and I see shadows moving. "Sophie, listen to me." I shouted, panic seizing my chest. "Get out of the house. Go to the neighbors. Do not stay inside. I'm coming to get you." I hung up and scrambled for my keys, but my hand passed through them. I tried again, focusing my will, forcing my hand to synchronize with the present moment. I grasped the metal, cold and solid, and ran to the door. But when I opened it, I didn't see the hallway of my apartment building. I saw the desert. I saw the vast, shimmering expanse of Interstate 10, stretching out to infinity under a blinding white sun. I slammed the door shut, breathing hard. I opened it again. The hallway was there. I was losing my grip on the where, as well as the when. I drove Austin in a fugue state, fighting the road every inch of the way. The highway was a kaleidoscope of shifting times. I saw accidents that hadn't happened yet. Construction crews working on roads that were currently pristine. Storms raging in skies that were currently blue. I navigated by instinct, by memory, by the sheer desperate need to reach my daughter. When I arrived at her aunt's house, Sophie was sitting on the front porch steps, hugging her knees. She looked small and terrified. The air around her seemed to vibrate, a subtle distortion like heat haze, even in the cool evening air. "Dad," she whispered as I ran up the walk. "It's following me. The shadows. They're waiting." I hugged her, and for a moment, I felt the solid warmth of her, the reality of her life. But even as I held her, I saw it, a faint, translucent image of her standing a few feet away, looking at us with sad, distant eyes. Her ghost, her future echo. The shadow line was trying to claim her, to pull her into the slipstream of my curse. Arthur was right. I was the breach. As long as I remained in this world, fighting the current, I was dragging the people I loved into the riptide. I couldn't save her by being here. I couldn't be her father and her danger at the same time. The decision I had wrestled with in the dark of the station was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. "Sophie," I said, pulling back and looking into her eyes, memorizing every fleck of color, every detail of her face. "I need you to be brave. I need you to stay here with your aunt. You're going to be safe. I promise." "Where are you going?" she asked, tears spilling over. "You just got here." "I have to go fix something," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I have to close the door I left open. It's the only way to make the shadows stop." "Will you come back?" I looked at her, and I knew I couldn't lie. "Not this time." "I don't know," I said softly, "but I will always be watching over you. Always." I kissed her forehead, a final benediction, and walked away before my resolve could crumble. I got back in my car and turned west, back toward the desert, back toward the source. I was going to the shadow line, and this time I wasn't going to just watch. I was going to end her. The drive back to mile marker 195 felt less like a journey and more like a return to the womb of the universe. The chaotic visions that had plagued me began to organize themselves as I approached the epicenter. The frantic overlapping of time smoothed out into a consistent rhythmic pulse. The desert was waiting for me. The highway was empty, bathed in the ethereal light of a full moon that made the sand look like snow. I pulled my car to the side of the road at the exact spot where I had first seen the phantom truck, the spot where I had tried to cheat death and failed. I turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. I stepped out into the cool night air. Arthur Vance was there. He was standing by the guardrail, smoking a cigarette that produced no smoke. He looked solid now, more real than the ground beneath my feet. He nodded as I approached. "You came," he said simply. "I had no choice," I replied. "It was taking her." "It takes everything eventually," Arthur said, "unless you give it what it wants." "What do I do?" I asked, looking out at the endless horizon. "You just let go," Arthur said. "Stop fighting the time. Stop trying to anchor yourself to the now. Step forward into the 15 minutes. I closed my eyes. I focused on the feeling that had been haunting me. The pull of the future, the drift of the timeline. Usually I fought it, clawing my way back to the present. Now I relaxed. I let the current take me. It felt like falling asleep, like the moment when gravity releases its hold and you drift into a dream. The world around me shifted. The colors became sharper, colder. The silence deepened into a hum, a vibration that I felt in my bones. I opened my eyes. I was still standing on the side of the highway, but the world was different. The moon was higher in the sky. A truck was passing by, its taillights trailing red streaks in the air, but there was no sound. I looked at Arthur. He was smiling a sad, knowing smile. "Welcome to the Echo," he said. I looked down at my hands. They were translucent. I could see the gravel through my boots. I turned to look at my car. It was gone. In its place was the empty shoulder of the road. "Where's my car?" I asked. "In the past," Arthur said. 15 minutes ago. You're ahead of it now. You're ahead of everything." "Is the breach closed?" "For them, yes," Arthur said, gesturing back toward the east, toward Austin, toward Sophie. "For the solid world, the wound has healed. You are the stitch that holds it together." I felt a wave of relief so profound it brought me to my knees, or the echo of my knees. Sophie was safe. The shadows would stop hunting her. She would grow up in a world of singular, linear time, unburdened by the ghosts of what was to come. And now, I asked. "Now we watch," Arthur said. "We walk the road. We see the accidents before they happen. We see the tragedies and the triumphs. Can we stop them?" Arthur shook his head. "We are the audience, Leo, not the actors. We witness. We remember. That is our burden and our privilege." I stood up and looked down the long, silver ribbon of the highway. I saw a car approaching in the distance. I knew with absolute certainty that in 15 minutes it would drift onto the shoulder. I knew the driver would be startled but safe. I knew this because I was already there in that moment, watching it happen. I thought of Sophie. I realized that while I could never hold her again, I could watch her. I could be the silent presence in her future, seeing her joys 15 minutes before she felt them, witnessing her life unfold with a breathless anticipation. I would be her guardian angel, separated by a quarter of an hour, but closer in spirit than I had ever been. "I'm ready," I said to the empty desert. Arthur faded away, his shift ending as mine began. I was alone on the road, the eternal watchman. I began to walk. The road stretched out forever, a timeline of concrete and asphalt. I walked into the future, step by silent step, leaving the present behind, a ghost in the machine of reality, keeping my vigil over a world that would never know I was there, waiting for the sun to rise on a day I would always see first.